Okay. Okay. So today I'm going to go through very little in the book. I'm just going to give you lots of background, lots of talking. And you can pick a notebook. There's some fancy ones, there's some plain ones. But if you want a notebook, take one because we will write quite a bit too. Just pass me another one.
Oh, that's a flower.
Yes, take pencils. There's pencils. Oh, I forget the pencil sharpener. Yeah. There's pencils in there. There's pencils over here.
Do you think I needed this mantra in my life or something?
No, I just handed the first one that I picked up.
Can you pick it up? Is there flowers?
Do you want me to say yes?
Look at that. That's even prettier than the front. I went to Staples thinking, oh, I can get pretty notebooks at Staples. They're like $7 for a notebook. So I drove all the way to Staples, got in the car, and my whole family wait in the car. They're like, you have nothing in your hands. I was like, I'm not spending $7 on a notebook. That's pretty. So we went to Walmart and should have gone to Walmart in the first place. Okay, so SAT. You are in this class not to learn content. There's going to be minimal content. Okay, there's 4 sections to the SAT. You've got the reading section, and the reading section is basically going to undo everything you've learned in English class, which is terrible. As a teacher, like, it's infuriating to tell you guys this. Hey, your teachers have told you this is how you read. This is how you digest information. This is how you answer questions. You can't do any of that. You have to do it this way. Then there's a writing and language section. That section is basically all grammar. And that usually makes people panic because they're like, no one taught me grammar. Or maybe they did in 5th grade. It's all going to follow like the same 8 rules. So we're going to make a list of those 8 rules. And every question will use one of those rules. So the writing and language section is the only section where I would say to you, go home and study this. Turn it into flashcards. Memorize those rules because all 44 questions will come from those rules. That's the section where if kids are like, I just need to boost my score a little bit, what's the best thing I can do? If that score isn't really high, that's what I'm saying. Make note cards. Everything follows one of those rules. Then you have 2 math sections. So in the math sections, you have one section with a calculator, one section without. We'll go through each of those. And you guys did practice tests, so you saw how there's like the grid-in sections where you have to actually work them out. If at this point, I don't know what math you're all in, if you're in Algebra 2 and you haven't seen all of it yet, I got texts from some people who were like, was I supposed to know how to do this? No, not necessarily. This is going to butt up to the end of the year where you may get it. Hello! Welcome. You can sit here, or you can sit over there next to Tanner, or you can sit in the stop seat and we can turn it.
I guess just sit here.
Okay. Okay. I'm just kind of talking about the SAT itself right now, so you're good. And you can pick a notebook if you want one, because we'll write a lot of stuff down. And there's pencils if you want another one.
Okay.
Okay. So, again, I'm not teaching you content. I am teaching you essentially how to beat this test. Okay? So, again, as a teacher, super maddening, because I'm basically saying, forget about how you're supposed to do this. This is all you need to know. As a parent, really maddening, because essentially you guys are going to be at such an advantage from these 16 hours you spend in here, because you are learning tips and tricks that you wouldn't otherwise know because they're not common sense if you didn't take the course. So in order to teach this course, I had to go through this company called the Princeton Review. They're only in Boston. We don't even have a Princeton Review in Vermont. They're not only in Boston, they're in big cities. So they sent me there for 5 weeks. For 5 weeks, Friday through Sunday, 8 to 5, I had to take their course Then I had to sit through someone else teaching the course, and then I had to teach the course. Then I had to get a perfect score on the SAT using their strategies. This was not your age, so it's not like, oh, she was that smart. This was like at 30 years old. I had to sit down and study and work their tricks. So every single SAT, they send people like me, maybe people who look younger, in to take the test, to blend in with the kids. And they take the test, and they just come back together and say, okay, what changed? What do we need to know? What are the strategies? How did you beat this test? And every 6 months, they redo this book with their new tips and techniques. A lot of it is the same, but it gets altered. They put new stuff in there. They find the new patterns, etc. So, sorry, 1 second. Okay, so now, next thing, colleges and the SAT. You don't have to write any of this down yet. I'll tell you when we get to content. Colleges and the SAT. So, there's the SAT and there's the ACT. Both essentially the same thing with just different sections. But every college will take either one. You guys take the SAT up here because that's what New England likes. I went to high school in Illinois. In order to take the SAT, I had to drive 3 hours to Chicago to find one. Everyone there took the ACT. But colleges will take either. So, there's a big takeaway from this class. Did you all sign up for the June test? Hopefully, because it's sold out or filled or whatever, or at least in St. Albans. So you have the SAT and we have the ACT. And here's what you need to know. The SAT is out of 1,600 points. You have a reading and writing section and you have a math section. And each one you can get a max of 800. Okay, so let's say you're going in June and you're feeling pretty good. You just got out of this class, you just finished the school year. How many of you are currently in Algebra 2? You all already? I don't know. You guys don't call it Algebra 2?
No.
What do you call your math?
We have like math 1, math 2, math 3, pre-calc, advanced math, or advanced math, pre-calc.
So what comes, it's probably your advanced math, right
Yeah.
before pre-calc.
Okay.
Are you in advanced
I'm in
math?
pre-calc.
Okay. Okay, so, and did you take it last semester, Tanner? And you guys all took it last semester? Okay. So this is a super big problem that we have right now. Everybody, like our guidance counselors, tell everybody to take the SAT their junior year. And this is, especially with COVID, this is a problem. Because if you took Algebra 2 your sophomore year, let's say, or your advanced math your sophomore year, that's 80% of the math on the SAT. So you spent that whole math class preparing for the SAT math. And the general rule of thumb from guidance counselors and the College Board is don't take the SAT till your junior year. So if you were someone who took this math your whole sophomore year, you essentially studied for a test for a year, waited a year, and then took the test. So I push big time. If you are a sophomore, I don't care. I don't care how old you are. You need to take the SAT right after you finish Algebra 2 because that's when you're ready. So back to this. You're finished your math. Okay, so you guys haven't seen this math in a little while. You took it last year or last semester. You leave this class, and let's just say you get a 600 here. And you haven't seen this math in so long that maybe that's a little bit of a weaker score, and you get 500. So that's your June test. You go and you take it. And then in September, you're not going to take, I'm going to talk about that September test in a second. So let's say you do this. Now, I strongly encourage you that even if you're signed up for the SAT, you need to sign up for the ACT at the same time. Okay, there's one in May, and I think another one in June. Never at BFA this year. I don't think there's any at Fairfax this year either. But they're in Colchester, they're in Essex, they're in, I don't know how much bigger those schools are, but they're in Chittenden County. So the ACT has one math section, a reading, which is separate from your writing, and a science. Now, this might scare you, because you haven't studied science or you don't know. I spelled it wrong. Science has, again, no content in it. It's reading charts and graphs. The SAT says we don't need a science section because there's some charts and graphs and that's all that science is. And they refuse to test it more than that. So here, when you take this section, they basically give you a passage with like 3 or 4 charts, and then they ask you 10 questions about those charts. Not content, can you read a chart or graph? So, the ACT is out of 36. So you can get a 9 on each of these. Okay, so let's say you go in, same thing. Let's make our math a little lower. Here's some good reading, and let's just say you're fantastic at your science section, charts and graphs. Okay, so you would look at this and you'd say, all right, I have an 1100 on my SAT. You'd add this up and say, I have a 26 on my ACT. And then you'd get on Google or you'd text me and say, hey, what's a 26 on the SAT? And you'd convert them. And you would probably find that the 26 was maybe closer to, I'm making this up, I don't know this, a 1300. So what you're noticing is I know the same stuff. But when I took the ACT, I got what was equivalent to a 1300 versus an 1100. From that point, throw away your SAT. Nobody sees your score, nobody knows you took it, you don't take it again. The SAT is not for you. Instead, you know, oh, I like the ACT better, my score is higher. And you go and you sign up to take another ACT. SAT's gone. You don't need it. Okay? Then here's the next thing. Okay, I decided instead, let's say the 2600 is actually a 1000. Same opposite, right? This is 1100, this one's higher, don't worry about the ACT anymore. People find if they are stronger math and science kids, they do better on the ACT. Okay? I got my first year paid for at UVM because my ACT score was so high, but on my SAT I only got a 1200. So I didn't send this in anywhere because I had a high enough score and I took them a week apart from each other. It's just the way the test was set up. So then you decide on taking a test again. Let's say you're choosing to take the SAT again. You go in, and before you take it a second time, you realize, man, I can do much better on my math. I haven't seen it in a long time. And this time you get a 700. But you spent so much time on math that your reading and writing score dropped, and you got a 500. So, your first attempt is an 11, your second attempt is a 12. Your real score is a 1300. They do what's called super scoring. So you can take this test 7 times, and you might have had your highest score in attempt 2 and attempt 7. And your score is what your highest one is. Okay? Nobody knows they took it 7 times. No one knows they got an 11 and a 12 and then a 13. They just know you got a 1300. Okay? This is called super scoring. As far as the ACT goes, the ACT has said, and the SAT said, oh, we're going to do this, but they haven't yet. The ACT says, you don't have to come in and take the whole test again. Your science score is good. Let's say you also really like your writing score. You can choose. On my second attempt, I'm only doing math. And you study really hard for math, and you come in on your next attempt, and you get an 8 on it. And then you can say, hey, the next time, I'm only going to do the reading and study for that and boost that score. Or you can do 2 at once or 3 at once, it doesn't matter. But the ACT allows you to just do one part at a time rather than sit and take the whole 4-hour test again. They both used to have an essay, and the SAT was always optional. Now, during COVID, they decided that the essay was a waste of time. So what used to happen is that when you were given an essay prompt, you had to write it, and then they asked all these people, like I said, these teachers that they put in their class and taught us all these tips and strategies, they asked them, hey, do you want to grade the essays? So every essay that would come in, they would pay $20 an essay, but you only had 1.5 minutes to grade it. So you would spend all your time, your college is writing on this essay score, and that person only looks at it for 1.5 minutes. And it was so prescriptive that I would take a whole class period and I would draw the outline on the board. And I'd say, this is your first sentence, second, third, fourth, fifth sentence. This is your second paragraph, first sentence. And any of you who took my class or a Princeton review class wrote the exact same essay. And it met their scores. And so they finally caught on and were like, this is really dumb. These tests aren't doing anything. These essays aren't doing anything. And they got rid of them. So no more essays. So if any of you signed up to do an essay, they don't really exist. I don't know. They say that the June SAT is the last one of 2020-2021 school year. And so they kept the essay with it as an option. You don't need to take it. Colleges aren't looking for it. It's gone. So if when you registered or your parents registered you, make sure you don't have the essay on there. 1, you paid for it. 2, you have to spend an extra 30 minutes in there. But you can go cancel it through the College Board. Okay. Questions about either of those? SAT versus ACT. Okay. Then people say, what's a good score? Right? What is it that you're aiming for? So every college, just want to make sure. Oh, I can do that in a minute. Every college, I shouldn't say every college. I know Endicott College doesn't actually even require the SAT anymore, or a standardized test. So it's out of 1600, and about 5 years ago, you guys know how you have to take SBACs and kneecaps? And they don't ever mean anything? Do they mean anything at your school? Does it go on your transcript or do anything? No. So the SAT got smart and said, hey, let's make the SAT just like the kneecap or the SBAC. So instead of kneecaps and SBACs, everyone just takes the SAT, which would make so much more sense to make it free, available during the day. You guys all know, you all prepare, and they use that. I know my dad is a teacher in New Hampshire, and that's all they give is the SAT one day instead of these others. So it used to be out of 2,400 points, and they decided to drop it to 1,600. So about 5 years ago, they dropped it to 1,600 points, and they changed it. They said, we're going to make it like the Common Core. So it used to be that when it was 1,600 points, they would say, okay, this is a made-up number, there's 100 points on the test, 100 questions. If you get 80 correct, you get this score. If you get 60 correct, you get this score. They don't do that anymore. Now what they do, so they made this new test. They said, okay, it's out of 1,600. And the College Board, who writes the test, just made up an arbitrary number. And they said, all right, we are going to say that the 50th percentile is a 1250. And they told everyone, you want to get a 1250, that's the 50th percentile. Then colleges started saying, okay, so if you say the 50th percentile means 1250, percentile means you are at or better than 50% of the other people. So they were saying right in the middle, people should be getting 1250. Then the colleges said, fine, but 50 isn't very good. We want better than average. So for example, UVM came out and said, if you want to go to school here, you need a 1400. Then they administered the test. So they made up these numbers without giving the test. They give the test, and nobody scores higher than a 1200. Forget the 50th percentile, no one even hit 1200. So all of a sudden, these schools panicking well, no one's getting in, because even our Ivy League schools aren't getting kids over 1200 right now. So they said, do we change the scoring or do we change the expectations? So what's happened is colleges don't set a score. Instead they say, I want anywhere between the 50th and 75th percentile. And then they discovered that this 1250 score is actually closer to the 75th percentile of people. So I tell everybody here, if your goal is to go to a college that's, you know, UVM level, that's a state college, can still be big colleges, the general goal I tell everyone is 1200. If you can get a 1200, you can pretty much go anywhere, most places. If you want Ivy League, or you want somewhere like Northeastern in Boston, you want to go to Harvard, for example, you can only miss one question to go to any real Ivy League school. So the general thing I say is aim for that 1200. And the reason I say that is you guys told me you took a PSAT. So you may have access to your PSAT scores and know where you fall in relation to that 1200. I'm going to score the test you made, that you gave me. That's going to give you also a secondary idea of where you might fall. Then we're going to work through this class and we're going to improve scores. So sometimes people improve their scores by 50 points, which is not, someone in this class editor was like, why am I taking this for 50 points? It all depends how much work you put in. I give you minimal work. Like tonight's assignment will take you 12 minutes. So it's not like I'm saying to you, go home and work your butt off. You have another full-time class, okay? Instead, I'm saying to you, here's all these tools. Do you want to go make flashcards and get a perfect score on your grammar section because you know the rules? Your score's going to go up a lot. You want to get the best reading score? Take practice. You have 25 of these reading passages in this book. The only proven way to really get through that reading is to practice the strategies I tell you, so do them. I have some kids who've improved 350 points. And I have some kids who have I have 2 kids who have gone through, and it's not me, I am not taking credit for it. They are that smart that they only missed one question on the whole test when it actually came down to it. Okay? So it doesn't matter where you start. I was a little afraid at first, like, what if these kids are so smart that I can't teach them more? Or that my strategies don't help? It hasn't seemed to matter. If it was someone who was at a 1400 level, they got up into the 1500s. If it's someone who's at an 8, I literally had someone go from an 800 to a 1250. So it depends on how much you want to do. Last piece on scoring. I can't tell you anymore how many to get. They wait until you take the test. So this is the standard bell curve. Any of you in the statistics class yet? You are?
I already took it.
Okay, maybe you'll remember.
Yeah.
Isn't this 50%?
Yes.
And then is this like 17%? Maybe 12?
There was a
He doesn't have to.
there was a rule. I just forgot.
13.5?
It's what?
13.5?
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah, it was
That's
like
what
a small number, and then it gets smaller and smaller.
Then it gets smaller and smaller.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter to show you my point here. What happens is they take, everyone who takes the test, you get the exact same test. So when you guys go in June, you're going to all have the exact same test. In the country. Probably in the world if you're like at a magnet school. So what happens is they take everybody's scores on that exact same test and then put them out and they say, oh, there were 100 questions. Everybody, or 95% of people, missed 5 of them, the same 5. They get rid of those. Now your test is only at a 95 points. So they account for that. Then they put them all in the standard curve. That's how they determine your score. So if you happen to take the test one day with like all the smartest people in the country, this is 50% of people. That means your scores that day are going to be really high. And you're going to need to perform really well. Let's say, hypothetically, you take it with all of the weakest people in the country that day. That means the most amount of scores are going to be weak. And depending on where you fall, will set your score. So they don't set your scores till the day of the test. Because they say, okay, this person fell here. we've determined that this percentage is worth 1,200 points. And then the part that's really crappy is, let's say you're scoring a 1,400 and you're really high. When you're in the 1,200 range, questions are worth more points than they are up here. Meaning, down here, if you get one more correct, you probably bump up to 1,250. But up here, if you get 1, 2, it might take you 3 or 4 more correct to move over because you're so close to the top. So this is a thing that's a bit of a disadvantage. It's also an advantage if you consider it going both ways, because it gives you room to say, oh, I needed 3 to go up, but I also need 3 to fall. So once you hit a certain point, you have a little bit more of a cushion, but it can either help or hinder you, depending on, should you have gone over, you needed 1 more and you would have jumped a whole 50. Okay. Last thing, and then we're going to get into the book. There was an SAT test this past weekend. And if you talk to anyone who took it, they may have told you there was what people like to call a surprise section on it. So your SAT should be 4 sections long. Reading, writing, math without calculator, math with calculator. A couple of years ago, I don't know if you guys remember Aunt Becky from Full House? She got in a lot of trouble for cheating on the SAT. Anyone know what I'm talking about? For real? You do?
I do.
So
I know Rosie.
multiple people, yeah. So some people went to like their SAT tutors and they said, I'll give you $50,000 if you take my kid's SAT. And then they went to the proctor at the school and said, I'll give you $50,000 if you let Miss Corrigan take the test. Or they went straight to the proctor and said, I'll give you $50,000 if you check the answers. So there was all of this stuff they got caught in. And then Aunt Becky from Full House paid a coach to pretend like her kids were on a team so they didn't have to take the SAT or something like.
No, it was that she was like a D1 rowing student.
Yeah,
So
so they
she got
pretended
the-
like she was on it, but it had to do with the SAT in some way.
She cheated on the SAT and I think she picked
Okay.
the rowing thing.
So these people are actually in jail right now for doing famous. There's a few celebrities that you might recognize their faces. So the SAT is saying, okay, we're going to troubleshoot cheating, and once in a while we're going to surprise people, and we're going to add an extra section to the test. So the point is, you guys all take the same exact test on the same day. It exists. I've seen them. Which means someone could have gotten their hands on them. So they create sometimes a 5th section. And while you guys all have the exact same 4 other sections, the 5th is a surprise. It comes at the last minute. So yours might be math, yours might be reading, yours might be writing, yours might be different math. It's only 20 questions long. So you're going to know if you get a surprise section, which one's a surprise, because it's the one with 20 questions in it. You'll be like, I already did 1 reading, why do I have another passage? I already did 2 math. So you can figure out which one it is because there's only 20 questions in it. It doesn't count. They're making sure you're not cheating. They're also testing questions for future tests to know if they're too hard or if they make sense or they're the right level. So you want to just go through those 20 questions. They will not hurt you. They will not help you. It's going to be a totally separate timing. It doesn't line up with the rest. Just know if it's there. Doesn't do anything for or against your score. It's their way of just kind of leveling the playing field and making sure people are following directions. Okay. Let's see if I did. Yep. All right, so let's go in this giant book and turn all the way to page 11. 12, actually. Actual page. Okay, so the College Board writes these tests. They also write your AP tests. They do not write the ACT. The ACT is in their own category. So I should have said that. If you choose to go register to take the ACT, you don't go to the College Board site like this. You just go to act.org. So you could just Google ACT test and you'll get there. So, I'm going to go through so much of this and attempt to, or at least the test, show you how to undo what your other teachers have told you to do, just in preparation for this test. Okay? It is not, these aren't strategies that will work on your teacher's test that they made themselves and that don't have to follow some set, number and quota that a big company makes them do. So just know that everything I teach you is going to work on any standardized test you take. Your AP tests, your SVATs, your NEAS, your NECAPs, ACTs, SATs, anything, even in college. So these skills are going to be useful for much more than just this test. So, if you look at the top of page 13, you see your very first sample multiple choice question. Okay, it says, what is the capital of Azerbaijan? Now I want you to read your answer choices. Do you know what the answer is? Did you know what the answer was before you read your answer choices? Probably not. The whole thing I'm going to stress throughout this whole class is you guys know the wrong answers. So much more than the right answers. So we are going to frequently take the approach of finding the wrong answers and getting rid of them in order to get to the correct answer. Okay? So we know the answer to number 1 is D, Baku, even if we don't know what or where Azerbaijan is. Okay? We call this the process of elimination. We will do it all the time. So at the bottom of page 13 is this gray box. That gray box just shows you kind of like this key. So the first one says, if you like an answer, put a check mark next to it. If you don't, maybe it's kind of right, a squiggle, question mark if you don't understand it, and then cross it out if you know that it's wrong. I don't care what you do. If you went into Princeton Review in Boston or a big city, they say to you, if you take this course and your scores don't improve by 50 points, we'll give you all your money back. And their classes, this class that I modeled it off of, there cost $1,600 if you want just the recorded version. You don't get to ask questions and you're not live. It's $3,600 if you choose to go take it in a class of 25 kids. So they'll say, we'll give you your money back if you don't go up 50 points. But what they do is they require a copy of your test. And then they say, hey, did you do this on every single question? Did you do every strategy we taught you in your test book? And if you don't, they say, well, you didn't do what we told you, so we're not giving you your money back. It's pretty ridiculous. That's how they protect themselves. You guys, like I said, it's up to you how much you're going to take from it, how much you're going to work, how much extra you're going to do. You do absolutely not have to do these kind of keys next to it. I find most people do anyway. If they know the answer's wrong, they cross it off. You all have your own thing. Do what works for you. Okay. Next page is process of elimination. I am going to write POE on the board all the time, or say POE all the time. Process of elimination. So look at number 2. It says, what is the capital of Qatar? Cross off any wrong answer. Okay, so this time, probably didn't get the answer yet. Probably just crossed off 2 choices. Maybe you know it, and that's great, but if you don't, you're probably between B and D now. So the question is, what do you do? Do you guess? Do you leave it blank? You want to guess, okay? Getting it wrong or leaving it blank will give you the same exact point. So never leave anything blank. You would just guess. But this is your number 1 biggest strategy I'm going to teach you in this whole course. Still don't have to write it down unless you want to. It is called letter of the day. And again, they don't want to admit it, but this works on every standardized test. So, in a standardized test, 25% of the answers are A, 25% are B, 25% are C, 25% are D. It's important for me to tell you this. The ACT uses A, B, C, D, and E, F, G, H. They count like this. A is the same as E, B is F, G, like that. I don't know why they give the extra choices. But in terms of saying, if there are 100 problems, 25 of them are either A or E. 25 of them are B or F. They're paired like that. I say that because if you go to take the ACT and you're like, wait a minute, why is there so many? It doesn't really matter if you divide them, but. So here's how a letter of the day works. If you went through that entire test and you just bubbled in A, guaranteed you'd get a 400. You'd get 25% of the points. So they're ultimately also saying that you can't get lower than a 400 because 25% of the answers are always one letter. So let's talk about taking the reading test and how you use this letter of the day. The reading test, I'll write all these specifics down after. In the reading, there are 5 passages. You have 65 minutes and 52 questions. You guys just all did a sample for me. So let's say you're going in to take this test one day and you go in for 65 minutes. And this really only gives you just barely, it's like 1 minute, 10 seconds per question or something really close to that. And that's if you don't read the passage or you don't have to go back and forth. Like, this is the amount of time you get. So you're going, okay, I just need to get through these questions. I don't want to leave any blank. And let's just hypothetically say you try all questions. You do them all first. And let's just say that you get 26 correct because it's the middle number. Okay. Now instead, I'm going to teach you pacing, or just about taking your time a little bit differently. So instead, you're going to go in with the attitude of, I am only going to do 3 passages right now. And in those 3 passages, there's 10 to 11 questions per passage. So let's say that you answer 32 questions. And you had 65 minutes. So let's say you take a whole hour just to answer 32 questions. Now you're almost at 2 minutes a question. You've really taken your time. You're not rushed because you know going in, I'm only answering 32 questions right now. This is in my goals. And so you get in there, and let's say you get 24 correct. Okay? Only because you went that much slower, you really took your time, you understood the material. Okay. Then, this is where you spent maybe 60 minutes. But you had 5 minutes. You're going to take your last 5 minutes. You're going to go to those last 2 passages where there's still 20 questions left. And you're going to letter of the day them. So let's say Yahir picks D. Those last 20 questions, he's just putting D in, and Will pick C. He just put C in. So you guys have your letters, you put them in. This test tells you 20% are each letter. That means you get 25%. That means you get a free 25%. So right here, you're going to get 5 points. So instead, your overall score is a 29 versus the 26. Okay, I see confused eyes, I see people nodding. It's really, this is one of those things. This is what we think we have to do, right? And some of you are going to want higher than a 29. So you're not just going to want to do 3 passages. Some of you might need the time. And so my point here is you figure out how much time you need. Rather than racing and rushing, take your time, go through it, get those, then letter of the day this. Couple important things about letter of the day. Do not count section by section because it's across the whole test. So don't say, oh, there's 52 questions in reading, so I must need 13 to be A, 13 to B. You might have 0 A's in your reading section. You don't know that. Just over the course of the test. 25% is each one. Do not change your letter as you go. Okay, it doesn't change from section to section. And lastly, I tell you this only because it happened 1 year ago. Somebody said, I had extra time. So I counted, I didn't have an even number. So I just changed a bunch of random ones so I had even amounts of each one. It's like, you can't do that. Because how do you know that you didn't change the ones you knew were right? You know, you take a test and you're like, that one's correct. I know I'm solid on all those. This person just went and said, well, I needed 6 more A's, so they just changed 6 to A's. Leave the ones you know are right. Rely on letter of the day for anything you have to guess on. Okay? All right, and so then again, this strategy here, 2 things together, letter of the day and pacing. You can take your time through this whole thing knowing that you have this in your back pocket. And don't forget, you can super score. So if you go in, you can't split time in different sections, but you could go in and say to yourself, I don't really know what to expect. And you take your time and you get through 3 passages and then you do this and you get this 29 and you can say, all right, I got this down, I feel really solid. Next time, I'm going to go a little faster. I'm going to cut off a little time. And when you take it again, you can change it to 4 and 1 or just however you want. Okay? And then you can just keep, again, improving your score each time you go. Okay, and then the last thing in this section is called, I'm on page 16, I'm jumping around, embracing your POOD. POOD means personal order of difficulty. Basically, something that might be easy for Bree might not be easy for Tim. So, they set this up, like especially in the math, and they say, okay, question 26 is the hardest question. It might be what you learned yesterday, so it's not going to be the hardest question. Or it might be your favorite thing to do in math. So even though it should be the hardest, according to the College Board, it's not the hardest for you. So don't try and write anything off assuming that should be hard. Or I know that's hard for someone else, because we all have our own, again, personal order of difficulty. Okay. And then that is that. So that's kind of all logistics. What the test is, what they're looking for. We'll break down each section as we go through them. SAT versus ACT. Yeah. Okay. Questions on any of just all of that so far? Lots of talking at you up to that point, up to this point. Okay. Now we're gonna write. And you are going to go to, and I'm going to write a ton today, but go to page 21 or 22. And we're going to start with reading stuff today. How many of you like the reading section? Do you guys like the math section or do you like the notes section? I personally like the reading section. Feels like pulling teeth for me. All I want to do is get through the reading. I don't mind any of the others, but the reading seems hard. And every time I get one of these books, and every time I give you guys a test, I give myself the test, and I do all this, and it's just the reading that always. just feel like it moves slow. Okay, so here is what you need to know. And I put this down on the last page, but you didn't have to write that yet. So you have 65 minutes. "52 questions. And this is always the first section on the test. So you're going to end up with 5 passages, 10 to 11 questions in each. So, this is different than English class, because in English class, you are often reading, processing, discussing, reading again, writing, and they might ask you for your opinion, and you support it. And it's kind of hard, I guess I shouldn't say it's hard to be wrong, because I don't grade English papers, but I feel like if it were me arguing something, if I had enough support and evidence, I could justify a lot of things. Doesn't work like that in the SAT. There is one correct answer, and you have to find it. This is the hardest part. If I said to you, what color is the sky? Everyone wants to tell me blue. I was giving this example last night at home, and my kids were like, it's blue, what are you talking about? The passage might talk about how it's not blue. And it doesn't matter that your entire life you know that the sky is blue. Because on line 37, it referred to a day the sky was orange. And so if you use your knowledge, you'd get it wrong. You have to find the answers here, and that's what we're going to practice and do. If you look at the bottom of 22, you can see a table with approximately number of questions and right answers to get a certain score. If you notice on the left, it says for a reading test score of, and it goes up to 40. So your reading and writing test is out of 800 points. Basically, you take your reading score and your writing and you add them and then you multiply by 10. So we would use the number 80, not 800. 40 of those would come from your reading. So what you can see here is an approximate, it's really hard, like I said, because they use this scale and they use the bell curve to figure out how many you would need. This is going to come more in handy when we have a baseline and say, okay, you want to improve your score by 100 points? We need to get you an extra 3 questions right on reading. That's more so when this thing will make more sense. Okay, so for every reading, I just went over with you how maybe you're only going to pick 3 passages. You don't have to get through all 5, and you definitely don't have to do all 5 in order. So you're going to sit down and take this test. You're going to get your book, and you are going to look at 3 different things, because you are going to pick the order in which you do your passages. That way, if you run out of time, you did the ones you liked the most. So you're going to, in order, to pick your passage. You are going to consider the following. So the first thing you're going to consider is the type of passage. There are 3 possible kinds. In the mix of 5, there is 1 literature. and it's always old. It's always like hard, like really old English and often difficult to follow. But your literature passage, you're going to have two that are social studies or history. Guaranteed one is about a president, always. It's either a speech or about one or something they did, always one about a president. And then there's two that are about science. Again, I'm not talking science content. It might just be about the woods, or it might be about the way that they built something, or the composition of something. It is not like biology, and that you have to know that stuff. And you might have one or two questions on a chart or table, but not always. Okay, so you're going to say, all right, I've got 5 passages. I love science, so what am I doing? I'm looking for my science passages. The next thing you're going to look at is topic, which is exactly what it sounds like. What's it about? Maybe I don't love literature, but, or maybe I don't love history, but the Great Depression really interests me. So even though it's history and I would usually skip it, I like that topic, so I'm going to choose that. So I might consider that. And the last thing is types of questions. And that's going to mean, and I'll explain it in a minute, line references, lead words, or something called paired questions. Okay, so you're going to sit down, you're going to get your test, and you and everyone else who took my class is going to start flipping through that test, right? Everyone else is just going to start on page 1 and think that's where they have to start. You do not. You can't go on to next sections, but pick the passage. If you only get through 3 or 4, you want to make sure that you skipped the one you didn't like, okay? All right, and then we are going to, and I'm just going to speak these out loud right now. I'm going to break them down in a minute. We are going to follow these 5 steps. Number 1 is going to be what's called reading the blurb. I'm on page 24. Number 2 is going to be called selecting and understanding a question. Number 3, read what you need. Number 4, predict the correct answer. 5, use POE. You hear, I'm going to write them all down for you in a minute with details. So, what do you notice isn't there? There's a major step not there.
It's a little no, never mind.
Reading it?
Yeah. Number 1 rule. Write it right on the top of that page, right on the top of your notebook, whatever you want. Never read the passage. Which is so silly. Again, lots of silly rules here. You are not reading that passage. Okay. I have had one kid who took this class who fought me on this, and he was so angry he didn't want to come back to class anymore because he thought I was ridiculous. and I was going against everything he knew, and that might be true. If you feel really strongly, then don't listen to me. But what happens most of the time when you read a passage?
Takes you a while.
Takes a long time, number one. How many of you read it and then go, oh, was I just reading? I gotta start over again. Or you read the passage, then you read the question, and then what do? You read the passage again. So we are skipping the reading the passage. Now that's going to be important for some questions, and we'll go over how we do that if we've skipped it. We haven't skipped it entirely. We will read only the parts we need. Do not sit down to read your passage. You will lose a lot of time. All right, so look at page 25. This is a sample passage that we're going to work through the rest of today. So on this, I just want you to notice a few things. At the top, it's bolded. It tells you questions 11 through 21 are based on the following passage. And then there's this little tiny, they call it the blurb. So that blurb says, this passage is adapted from Linton Weeks' The Windshield Pitting Mystery of 1954 from 2015 by NPR History Department. What I want you to see, so that's your blurb. When I go through the steps, that will be step one. That blurb tells you these two things. Okay, that's how you get the information without reading the passage. So go right to it. So you'll go back to each passage, flipping through them, you'll read your blurb, and you'll be able to tell me, okay, what's the type, what's the topic, which one do I want? On this reading, you see that there's line numbers every counting up by 5, so they're numbered on the left-hand side. Okay, those are important. We're going to use those all the time. And then turn the page to where you see the sample questions that go with this passage. Okay, so there's no answer choices here. I just want you to see the structure of the questions. Number 11 says the central claim of the passage. Number 12 says, the author most likely mentions a Canadian scientist, line 22, and the Utah resident, line 26, in order to. All I want to point out here is the difference in those types of questions. The first one is what we call a general question. This is the central claim of the whole passage. The next one is what we call a specific question. And we'll go over each of those in a second. What else do you notice about the questions? Look at the rest of them. What trends do you see? What do you notice? Yes?
It tells you where they are.
What?
It tells you where they are.
Tells you where they are. So see this? Line references? Tells you where they are. We want line references, right? Because we're not reading the passage. So I don't want to dig through the whole thing. If you look at number 14, it gives you a line reference as well as what I call a lead word, so it has a vocab word, common. But if you look at 15, that also, even though there's not a line or quotation marks, the passage indicates that an effect of aggregating events, still a vocab word, still a lead word. And the reason those work is even if I don't know the number, I can find that word. That's what's called a lead word. Later, we'll do work with paired questions, but if you look at 16 and 17, this is the paired question. 16 says, according to the passage, what percentage of cars suffered damage? It's just a normal question. But 17 says, which choice provides the best evidence for the answer to the previous question? So it links them together. Those are going to end up being your easiest questions later, once I go over them. Okay, so I want you to also consider the types of questions. There are some passages with no line numbers. I don't